Hello everyone and welcome. Dzień dobry, witam. As for the program, I will start off by giving you a little context about why we're here. I will then call forward students of the UC to present something they've prepared for you. I will also read you a poem by Rob Aitchison, after which we will commence with the wreath laying ceremony. Afterwards, the last post, 2 minutes silence, and the reveille will mark the end of our service. I would like to especially welcome representatives of the various embassies, Her Excellency Lisa Helfand of the Canadian Embassy and Defense Attaché. Let me remind myself, my apologies, Mark Lafortune. Welcome. Drielse, Defense Attaché of Poland. British Embassy Defense Attaché Colonel Piers Strudwick, and a representative, Alderman of the Municipality of Arnhem, Bob Moulos. As well as every one of you, friends and family, those who have been here before and those who are new to this service, I welcome you all. Let me start out by saying that we are here overlooking the area where in the night of the 25th into the 26th of September 1944, Operation Berlin took place. The nighttime evacuation at the end of Operation Market Garden. It was to bring back the surviving British and Polish troops back across the River Rhine, situated behind you. They had become surrounded and their situation had become untenable. The British 260th and the 553rd Field Companies and the Canadian 20th and 23rd Field Companies of Engineers made dozens of trips across the river and managed to rescue around 2,500 troops. This monument is dedicated to them. At the time, in the dark and the pouring rain, the rescued had hardly seen their saviors. The quote on the monument itself behind me illustrates this, as it says, "They were just whispers and shadows in the night." In previous years, I've always highlighted specific details of the operation, details that shed some light on how incredible this feat actually was. How the Evinrude engines on the storm boats, though strong and crucial in the operation, were initially made for recreational use and weren't completely waterproof. How bad the weather was, how heavy the storm boats, and how muddy the fields, and how high the dike we're standing on today, and how slippery the riverbank. All whilst dragging the boats over them, and in these conditions made the rescues. I also previously noted how strong the opposition was, as the Germans had elevated positions in height at the westbound heights, which took the whole operation under heavy fire. I would again like to highlight one of these details, and that of the river itself, the River Rhine, flowing behind you. At the moment, perhaps quite lazily, as in our changing climate is suffering more and more from droughts, and water level is higher up, but it's nothing near what it was back then. I grew up in Arnhem and studied in Wageningen and used to row on the River Rhine, and everyone here in the area is always reminded of how dangerous it actually is. There are strong currents, and in many places these currents are very unpredictable. It is worth noting that even though the number has decreased since 1950, still people drown in the River Rhine. And these men were not out swimming on a summer's day. It was night. These men were not wearing swimwear. They were wearing combat gear, sometimes even woolen kilts, which when soaked become very heavy. And for these men, drowning wasn't the only thing that could get them killed. Of the men that lost their lives during the crossing, some were carried downstream, as far as 35 miles, to our Dutch friends 70 kilometer, and thus some are buried far from here. It is because of that reason I would also like to call attention to two traditions that have sprung up in relation to Operation Berlin. The first has to do with the men I just mentioned, those who were carried away by the river and buried off far away. In order to include them properly in this service, those individuals have been given wreaths and flowers by a group called the Arnhem Riders, a group of motorcyclists, mostly ex-paras, many of them engineers, who who ride along the various cemeteries with marked and unmarked graves to lay flowers on them. With help of locals, this was even continued throughout the pandemic. So this year will be the 9th consecutive year that the riders visit those graves. It might be somewhat unusual during a remembrance ceremony, but because it is so much appreciated, I would like to ask you all to applaud the Arnhem Riders. Another tradition that sprung up is the White Ribbon Mile, which is a walk you can take at the other side of the river, which marks a path that the troops took towards the river, heading towards the boats that would evacuate them. Marked in the black of night by white strips of parachute, this route is now again made accessible and marked by white cloth. Local volunteers and schools are involved, and the silent march marks its end. Throughout position and circumstances, the majority of the crossings were carried out by the 23rd Field Company of Royal Canadian Engineers. They specifically lost 7 men that night. They are Lieutenant Martin, who is buried at the Canadian War Cemetery in Holton, Lance Corporal Ryan, who is buried at the Civilian Cemetery in Rhene, Sapper Hope, who is buried at the Civilian Cemetery in Rhene, Sapper Magnussen, who is buried at the Civilian Cemetery in Gorinchem, Sapper Thompson, who is buried at the Canadian War Cemetery in Groesbeek, Sapper Roherty, whose location is unknown, but who is also mentioned on the Canadian War Memorial in Groesbeek, and Sapper McKee, who is buried at the Airborne Cemetery in Oosterbeek. Every year, students, sometimes of the Canadese school in Tilburg, but this year of the UC, research the life of one of these men. This year, they will tell you something about Sapper Magnussen, and therefore I would like to call forward Wies and Zoe to tell you a thing or two about him.
Good evening. I would like to introduce Wies Kemmers, a student from Canadese Secondary School in Terbergen, the Netherlands. My name is Zoe Landry. I am from Bathurst High School in Bathurst, New Brunswick, Canada. In preparation for our commemoration today, we have researched the life story of Canadian sapper Harold Cecil Magnussen, one of the gallant engineers who helped evacuating the men of the 1st Airborne Division on this very spot. We are grateful to be given the opportunity to share his story with you today. Harold Cecil Magnussen was born on the 21st of April 1922 in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada. Harold and his twin sister Hilda were born prematurely, and the doctor gave them little chance of survival. Back in the day, there were no modern tools like an incubator, but Mother Magnussen, a Canadian married to an immigrated Swede, never gave up. She fed the twins using a pipette for eye drops and kept them warm in a box with woolen blankets next to the stove. The children both survived and grew up well. At the age of 8, Harold went to school for the first time and left the school at the age of 16 to go to work. Before enlisting in the Army in 1940, Harold had several odd jobs. He was a delivery boy and a clerk for a grocery store. Later, he worked as a laborer in a sugar refinery. In his spare time, Harold was very social and athletic. He liked playing basketball, softball, and swimming. Before Harold Magnussen came to our country by way of Normandy and Belgium, like many Canadian troops, he was stationed in the United Kingdom in this period. Harold Magnussen came overseas from Canada to the United Kingdom. During the months of training in England before D-Day, he regularly wrote letters home to his twin sister. They always ended with an endearing, "Your better half, Harold." On June 6, 1944, Harold landed on Juno Beach with the Canadian forces, fighting his way through France and Belgium before entering the Netherlands. During Operation Berlin, now 78 years ago, Harold left this very shoreline in an engineer stormboat. In the middle of the river, they were hit by artillery, causing Harold to fall overboard. We are not sure how he died. He may have been killed instantly or drowned later, and because of the heavy shelling and strong current in the river, Harold was never found again. 7 weeks later, on November 14, 1944, two 11-year-old boys stood on the banks of the river Lek, near the town of Tienhoven. They were there because occasionally wreckage floated past that could be of value in these terrible times. One of the boys was Adrie, the son of the Tienhoven ferryman, who used his father's rowing boat to pick up things from the river. They had recently found a bag of flour. Although a bit wet, it was very valuable find during the so-called hunger winter in our country. The boys saw something floating. They hoped another bag of food was coming their way and jumped into the boat to recover it. They were astonished and taken aback that they saw two bodies, and despite their young age, they put a rope around the middle end of the corpse and towed them to the riverbank. This was a heavy and tough task for two boys against a strong current. They reported their horrible find to the ferryman, who sent the boys home and signaled the German occupying forces, and also the sexton of the local church in Tienhoven. Their remains were put in lead-lined coffins and transferred 2 days. The remains, which proved to be from a Polish and a Canadian soldier, were buried later in the old cemetery in the town of Worden. Later on, one of the remains proved to be that of Sapper Harold Magnussen. Today we would like to commemorate Harold and all the other sappers of the 23rd Field Company Royal Canadian Engineers, who gave their lives on this dreadful night. Lieutenant Martin, Lance Corporal Ryan, Sappers Hope, Broherty, and Thompson. They were just whispers and shadow in the night. Let us not forget. Lest we forget, we will remember them.
I will now read to you a poem which I was introduced to by my friend Henk Duinhoven, my predecessor in leading this ceremony. It's called The Longest Day by Rob Aitchison. Do not call me hero when you see the medals that I wear. Medals maketh not the hero, they just prove that I was there. Do not call me hero, now that I am old and grey. I left a lad, returned a man, they stole my youth that day. Do not call me hero, when we ran the wall of hill. The blood, the fear, the cries, the tears, we left them where they fell. Do not call me hero, each night I stop and pray. For all friends I knew and lost, I survived my longest day. Do not call me hero in the years that pass, for all the real true heroes have crosses lined upon the grass. We will now commence with the wreath laying ceremony. And I would first like to call forward Canadian Ambassador to the Netherlands, Her Excellency Lisa Helfand, and Defense Attaché Colonel Mark Lafortune. On behalf of the British Embassy, Defense Attaché Colonel Piers Strudwick. behalf of the Polish Defense Attaché, Colonel Drielse. On behalf of the Canadian Legion Branch 005, Daniel Murphy. On behalf of the Parachute Regiment, Colonel Liam Cradden. On behalf of the 23rd Parachute Engineers Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Crossley. On behalf of the 21st Independent Parachute Company, Andrew Mollis. On behalf of the Arnhem Riders, John Johns. On behalf of the 299 Association, Nigel Sissons and Chris Duggan. On behalf of the Airborne Engineers, Yorkshire Branch, William Scowler. On behalf of the Swindon Paras, Tony Ellis. On behalf of the Market Garden Foundation, Frans Ammerlaan. Marion Duinhoven. On behalf of the UC, Vies, Zoe and Hannah. Before we lay the last wreath, is there anyone who might have been missed who would still like to lay a wreath? This is the time. Then I would like to call forward Alice van Beckham, who will lay down a flower arrangement symbolizing the stormboats with a rose for each of the fallen. Thank you. We've had rain before on this moment, many times, but in my mind it's always during the 2 minutes of silence that the sun comes out just a little bit brighter, as it did today. I thank you all very much for coming. I would like to give special thanks to those who have made it possible. Jan Pitts and his colleague on the pipes and drums, one of them a Dutch engineer, our bugler, Berry van Brakel, those who founded the monument, like the predecessor I just mentioned, Henk Duivenhoven, my dear friend, and those compatriots of him who made this possible, and who entrusted me on carrying on this service. I would thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you again next year.